Good morning, everyone. Jim Clarke here at the Synchronicity Sanctuary to share another contemplative focus with you today. So, had some technical difficulties with my first run on this video, so we're going to start over. And the subject that I want to share with you today is what appears as the many is the one. Every human being is a gateway through which the pretense of individuality plays itself out. That gateway exists simultaneous to the one consciousness that is all and everything. So we as an individual exist simultaneous to another aspect of who we are, which is the source consciousness that is all and everything. Now that may seem kind of impossible to a lot of people because it runs against the common way that people experience our world, which is there's the good and there's the bad, and there's a constant desire to get rid of the bad and make more of the good and so forth and so on. This has been a human dilemma throughout human history. However, the reality of our existence here as individuals is that the individual aspect of our experience is more illusion than truth. And that in fact, in truth, we are the same consciousness that is all and everything, but we're also having an individual human experience through which we generate our own experience by what we focus upon. What we don't realize, and what most people don't realize, is that they have immense power within themselves to create their reality as an individual human being. And so they go on and on, unconsciously generating experiences and projecting that to the external world, thinking that they're a victim of the world outside them, but there's no world outside them. There's no world outside me. I'm generating my experience by my choices. And so now that I'm aware of this as a tool to use in terms of how things work as a human being, how does experience work? The pretense is fine, and the truth is great. Now, what I want to do is to be able to access the truth of who I am while I'm a human being. So in order to do that, I focus upon the positive polarity because what I have learned is that by default, the negative polarity is dominant in this world. This is a very densified world considering how subtle energy consciousness is. In order for it to generate manifest reality, it must contract itself first into energy and then energy into form, and that's quite a step. And that is why human forms, all physical forms, are difficult to maintain, especially living human forms. And so in order to access the truth of who I am, in order to have that experience, I must generate power within myself by focusing on the non-dominant polarity, the positive polarity, which is what life here at the sanctuary is all about. It's about meditation and holistic lifestyle. It's about using contemplative focuses like this in order to bring ourselves to the experience of who we truly are. Because we have the power to do this. Simply that. And in a context like this where that's your daily lifestyle, you have an accelerated evolution, if you will, towards that experience simply because that's what your whole life is structured around. So you meditate every day, you live a holistic lifestyle to support the balance that you're trying to attain inside yourself. What you want to do is you want to flip the scale so that the positive polarity becomes dominant in your experience. And that is not an easy or fast task. So you meditate every day and you go through a process wherein you have peak experiences, you get a taste of who you are, you get a taste of the truth of who you are, and then in relation to those peak experiences, the old data that you have accumulated in this life has to go because it's no longer commensurate with your experience. You're experiencing yourself newly and more truthfully. What is not truthful that you hold on to inside yourself must be cleared out. And that is a process that is oftentimes a little has difficulties. It's not pleasant all the time, but it's an absolute proof that your meditation as a balancing technique is working, because you wouldn't have those experiences. You wouldn't have that clearing process if it wasn't working. You would just simply remain the same. And and it goes beyond belief, of course, because as you meditate and you clear out more and more of your negative data, the false data about who you truly are, then the positive, truthful data becomes more and more present in your experience. And as that reaches a certain point, when the positive polarity reaches a balance with the negative polarity and then begins to dominate the negative polarity, then you start to have the experience of presence, the presence of the truth of who you are. That is an energetic presence, but it carries with it a kind of knowing that cannot be had any other way. And once you get to that point, your process of bringing yourself to the truth of who you are, to become aware of that and to experience that, that whole process accelerates even more. But to get to that point and bring yourself into the awareness of who you are when you're still struggling with all that negativity and all that false beliefs about who you are, that is not easy. It's not an easy path for people to take. Now, you can meditate for stress, you can meditate for anxiety, you can meditate for conditions, and it can help. But to go beyond that, to really dig in deep about who you are and what life is, to bring yourself to know yourself in that way, that is something that you really have to dedicate yourself to. And without that dedication, it's a rough road, and you probably won't take yourself beyond a certain point and you'll get worn out. I did this early on, way back in the 70s when I started to meditate. I didn't know what meditation was. I had no knowledge of it in depth. I didn't understand the mechanics of consciousness and how it works. So I meditated and I started to cathartic my brains out here and there, and my interpretation at that time was, it must not be working. I must have done something wrong because I feel terrible, and I'm supposed to be generating a very positive, loving experience that goes beyond the day-to-day experience of flesh and blood and suffering, basically. And I would have those experiences momentarily and get glimpses into that, but which would trigger, of course, the process wherein what I was still holding on to inside myself had to be cleared out. And in that clearing process, because I didn't understand what it was, I fought with that, and I thought something was wrong. And so I just kind of worked against myself for many years because I didn't understand the mechanics. I didn't know quite what to do, and I had no context where I could get that information from. Back in those days, there was no internet. I would read books, but then most of them were written in India or someplace in the Far East, so the analogies and the languaging was something that was very hard to comprehend. And so anyway, I struggled along that way many years until I came here. And once I did come here, I was so happy I did. It was a struggle. It wasn't easy because the intensity of that process was even greater, because now I was living in a context where that was every day. Every day I would get up, I would do some exercise, usually aerobics. Then I would prepare myself to meditate by those aerobics and getting my body all ready to quiet down. And then I would sit to meditate at least once a day, if not 2 or 3 times. And so that whole process was even accelerated and emphasized much more than I could ever do when I was living outside of here, when I had to work, constantly have a job and take care of myself and take care of all these things in life. Well, that takes a lot of time. Makes it difficult, but not impossible. There are many people who are a part of this organization who have never lived here, and they're very expanded and aware human beings because they simply followed the directions of our teacher. They meditated every day. They did their aerobic exercises every day. They watched their diet. They did everything they could to facilitate and maintain a positive polarity focus on physically, emotionally, and mentally. So, in that process, even though it's a simple one, it's a challenging one. And so, most people who start to meditate go for a little while and then they drop it because the difficulty shows up, and they do what I did back in the early days, and they think that there's something wrong or they're not capable of going further and actually experiencing themselves as a spiritual being, and which is not true, but without someone there to guide you, and without being able to get that information and get somebody to help coach you through that process, the likelihood is that between the struggles you're having just in a day-to-day life and then taking this on as well, it's going to be very difficult, because you have challenges in everyday life when you're living in the world on your own, as I did. And then when you come to a place like this, that shifts, and you have an emphasized process far beyond what you could do by yourself on the outside world. That but you're in a context where you have people to help you out. You have people to, if you have a difficulty, if you have an imbalance that requires some kind of a special approach for you to deal with it. So let's say you have a mental condition going on where some part of the brain is not working the way it's supposed to. So say some neurotransmitters are just not being produced enough, or something like that. You have people to coach you and help you find ways to offset that imbalance so that you can proceed in a more normal fashion. So anyway, this is the approach that I'm reaching with this contemplation. What appears as the many is the one is often misunderstood, because our whole lives are usually based upon the conflict between the polarities, the good and the bad, the ugly and the beautiful, and so forth and so on. And we choose what we think is a positive polarity, and when we try to get rid of or avoid the negative. But one cannot exist without the other one. You cannot have love without its opposite. You cannot have good without its opposite. And so without both polarities being present, there is no experience at all. And that's the whole idea of the human experience, is to have experience. This is the primary intention in consciousness, is to fully experience and be itself. In order to do that, it had to create the polarities in order to generate that experience. And within that, it starts off with the pretense as being the dominant experience it has. The pretense that it is a isolated individual where you are the subject and everything else in the world is an object in your experience, and you can have all kinds of relationships with those objects, but you're not alone. There isn't one. There are many. And so that is by definition going to be a fear-based experience, because when you're surrounded by many and you're an individual surrounded by them, then your ability to maintain life, to survive in that kind of a context, you have to belong. You have to be wanted. You have to be a part of whatever is surrounding you. And so your life is more geared toward being accepted, being taken in, and being a part of whatever context you find yourself in. And so it's a very, very fear-based existence, and you're constantly trying to maintain a status in your situation that will guarantee your survival, And so as long as life is based on this, there's no room for you to expand your awareness and to become fully aware of who you truly are, who you were before you were born, and who you will still be when your body is done and you move on from there, which we call death, which is really just another illusion. So the human experience is the play of consciousness pretending to be something other than itself. So the pretense and truth coexist in perfect harmony. In truth, they do, because without it, without that harmony, this experience would not be possible. Not the negative experience, not the positive. No experience would be possible. But to generate the experience of knowing who you truly are, which is the ultimate mastery of the human experience, that would not be possible either. So that's what it's really all about, and that's really what's going on in the world always. It's every individual as a part of the whole, expression of the whole, is moving themselves from the illusion of who they are to the truth of who they are. And that's what's really happening. That's the news broadcast from Synchronicity Today. So with that, I will leave you till next Monday morning and share another contemplative focus with you. So until then, I bid you adieu. Thank you for watching.